So there's this federal operation, right? It's called Metro Surge, and it sends literally thousands of agents into American cities. What follows is a firestorm. We're talking fatal shootings, mass detentions, and just a massive controversy. Today, we're going to break down this escalating conflict between federal authorities and the huge wave of resistance that's fighting back.
And right at the heart of this whole story, you can just feel the anger and the fear on a local level. This quote here from Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey, it came right after a major court ruling. And wow, does it capture the feeling on the ground. Basically, no matter what a judge says, the damage has already been done.
Okay, so how did we even get to this point? To understand that, we've got to start with the operation itself. Now, officially, Operation Metro Surge was all about targeting national security threats and violent crime. But on the ground, it pretty much immediately sparked an insane legal and political battle.
And you know, right from the get-go, this legal fight was completely black and white, depending on who you asked. You had a federal judge who just dismissed the whole argument to block the operation, calling it a thin reed, which is basically legal speak for weak. But on the flip side, the Attorney General immediately spun that exact same ruling as a huge legal win. So this wasn't just some legal disagreement. It was really the first shot fired in a much, much bigger political war.
But look, this wasn't just a political battle being fought in courtrooms and press conferences. The real story, the one we need to talk about, is how this high-level conflict filtered all the way down and started affecting individual lives in really dramatic and deeply personal ways.
Meet Liam. He's just 5 years old. When he and his dad were detained outside Minneapolis, photos of him wearing his little Spider-Man backpack and a hat with bunny ears just went everywhere. They went viral. And his story, it put a child's face on this whole policy, turning an abstract political debate into something incredibly personal. It just galvanized public pressure for his release.
And it wasn't just families caught in the middle. The human cost extended even further. Two journalists, Don Lemon and Georgia Fort, were actually arrested while they were covering a protest inside a church. The federal charges against them were serious. We're talking about interrupting a religious service. But their position was firm. They weren't protesters, they were reporters, just doing their jobs.
After her release, Georgia Fort didn't stay quiet. She issued this powerful challenge to other journalists, basically suggesting her arrest wasn't just random. Her words point to a potential chilling effect, the idea that maybe, just maybe, the goal was to intimidate the press and make other journalists think twice before they cover these kinds of events. So you have these incredibly personal, emotional stories hitting the news, and boom, they just lit a fire under a national movement. The response that followed wasn't quiet and it wasn't isolated. No, it was massive and it was loud. And when I say a national movement, I mean the scale was just staggering. We're talking about over 300 protests across the entire country. This wasn't just a few scattered demonstrations. This was a coordinated, nationwide cry of opposition. So, you might be asking, what was fueling all this massive outrage? Well, this chart from the Marshall Project, it tells a huge part of the story. The average number of kids detained per day absolutely skyrocketed. It went from 25 under the previous administration all the way up to 170. That's a nearly 7-fold increase. And that single statistic became a powerful, powerful rallying cry for protesters everywhere.
And if you were on the ground in the streets, the energy was absolutely electric. You had tens of thousands of people marching in cities from New York all the way to Tucson with chants like "Abolish ICE," that's Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and "No Fascist USA" just echoing from coast to coast. But here's where things get really interesting. The pushback wasn't just coming from protesters in the streets anymore. We started seeing city and local governments, the officials themselves, begin to strategically push back against federal power.
And Chicago is the perfect case study here. The mayor didn't just release a statement. They laid out this really clear 4-step game plan. This was a real strategy. They issued an executive order to actively investigate federal agents, to document any illegal activity they saw, and to build an entire system to hold them accountable for crimes in their city.
And this quote from Chicago's mayor, it just perfectly captures that defiant stance. This wasn't just talk. This was a city basically drawing a line in the sand and telling federal agencies, your authority is not absolute here. Not within our borders. And sometimes that official pushback wasn't just on paper. It got real. I mean, it became a direct face-to-face confrontation. In St. Peter, Minnesota, the local police chief personally stepped in when federal agents pulled a U.S. citizen from her car at gunpoint. This was a first in the state, local police getting involved in a federal immigration operation. It was just a stunning new level of local defiance.
You know, a fight this big, it doesn't just stay in the political arena, it was bound to explode onto the cultural scene, and boy did it ever, on one of the biggest stages in the world. This fight had become a defining moment for the entire nation.
So picture this, the Grammy Awards. Bad Bunny, one of the biggest artists on the planet, wins Album of the Year. He gets up on stage and he uses that moment to deliver this incredibly powerful message. He spoke directly to the harsh rhetoric being used, affirming the humanity and the Americanness of his community. And then he ended with this call for love over hate.
And he wasn't the only one. On that very same night, on that very same stage, Billie Eilish steps up to accept her award and echoes what people were chanting in the streets. She says no one is illegal on stolen land, and she urges the millions of people watching to keep fighting, telling them that their voices really truly do matter.
So, that leaves us here with this massive question. From courtrooms to city streets, from local cops to the Grammy stage, this whole conflict has forced us to ask something fundamental. When every single part of a society, its institutions, its citizens, its culture, is locked in a struggle over what it believes, who ultimately gets to decide what that nation really stands for?